I'm Marnie Smith from the Burlington Public Library. Welcome to tonight's program, Spice Bowl, part of the Discover India series. This program series is brought to you through a partnership between the India Association of Greater Boston and the Burlington Public Library. And with participation of public libraries in Andover, Grafton, Groton, Manchester by the Sea, Norwood, Reading, Westford, and Woburn. I'd like to thank the members of the India Association of Greater Boston and Rupesh Mathur, our presenter for tonight, for the generous donation of their time and knowledge to make this series happen. Tonight's program will be a presentation followed by question and answer session. In order to ask questions, please feel free to do so at any time during the Q&A, during the presentation using the Q&A feature within Zoom. And your questions will be answered at the end of the program, time permitting. Joining me is Nilesh Agarwal, a director of the India Association of Greater Boston, who will introduce tonight's presenter. Thank you.
Thanks, Marnie. We thank Burlington Library, Michael Wick, Marnie Smith, and all New England area libraries. This is the second year of IAGB's partnership with Burlington Library, and we really appreciate this partnership. For the last 60 years, Indian Americans have come together through IAGB in search of assimilation and integration into the greater Boston community. IAGB strives to foster a strong Indian social culture, civic, and community presence in New England. IAGB is dedicated to civic, community, social culture causes, and Discover India series brings many flavors of India's culture to you in very interactive way. Now, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Rupesh Mathur. Rupesh Mathur, a product manager by profession, enjoys learning and teaching culture, history, and philosophy, and is interested in the impact of technology on real world. Rupesh teaches Indian culture at Shishu Bharati School of Indian Culture in Nashua. Thank you. Over to you, Rupesh.
Thank you, Nilesh. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're enjoying a very nice summer evening today. I was just out, and good to see so many people, out and about with their families. And thank you for joining us on a very interesting and very topical presentation. So this presentation is titled Spice Bowl, which is the interesting and exciting global history of spices and role in Indian cuisine. So when you talk about Indian food, the first word that comes to mind is spices, right? So let's start with a basic definition of what we consider a spice. So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, a spice is an aromatic or pungent vegetable substance used to flavor food. Example, cloves, pepper, or cumin. And spice is a word that originates from Middle English. It's a shortening of Old French spice and from Latin species. And it has a connection to biology. And spices essentially come from many parts of the world, and they are both products and drivers of global trade and commerce, and have been for the last thousands of years. So I'll show you some of the trade routes in a little bit. And if you look at the kind of words that are associated with spices, you get words like curry, cumin, black pepper, chili, saffron, aromatic, herbs, turmeric. Those are the kinds of things that that come to mind. And then if you look at McCormick, which is the largest spice manufacturer in the United States, they have a McCormick Atlas that shows all the spice routes. So you can see all of these routes. So the spice trade is a very global type of trade, and it spans many, many continents and many, many countries. And in fact, it's one of the major categories in terms of international trade. So now I want to just start with a basic map of the typical spice route. So when you talk about spices, it has an exotic meaning, but in reality, spices have been traded between Asia, Europe, and Africa for thousands of years. And there were two trade routes. One was the sea trade route. So you can see from Europe, there were trade routes from the Greek and Roman empires, or Greece and Rome in ancient Europe, all the way through Egypt and down through Arabia and to India. So there are all these trade routes on which spices were brought in, and then they were traded back. So for instance, Roman ships would come in bearing gold and silver, and they would load up on spices and then take them back. And as history advanced, the spice trade extended all the way out into the Indian Ocean, closer to Australia. So they are the so-called spice islands, which are also called the Moluccas, which are the extreme end of the spice trade. So spice trading has been going on for a long time. And India has been at the center of it for all that time. So you find that you have the sea routes, and then you also have the land routes. So these land routes are very long. So for example, the traveler Marco Polo traveled along these routes, and these go all the way to India, to China, and many other places. And these places, in fact, even today, they produce most of the spices in the world. So you find that India, China, Indonesia, these are the countries that grow most of the spices that you see in the supermarket. And on the right is a Roman villa. So this was actually excavated fairly recently in a village in South India. And this is where the Romans used to come and they would ride the trade winds during the so-called monsoon season from Arabia. And they would come all the way down here, and they would basically stay for a few months until the winds turned and they could actually ride the winds and go back. So this is a Roman villa that's in South India that was discovered. And these are coins that were excavated there. And these show the Emperor Nero, for example. So this on the right, the face of this emperor is Emperor Nero, for example. So that's the famous Nero. And then if you look at the statue that's here, that's a Buddha statue that was excavated from Alexandria, Egypt, which was here. And it's thought to belong to a trader, an Indian trader, somebody who actually went and lived there, and just like somebody who was an expatriate lived there, built a temple to Buddha, or a shrine to Buddha, and then that has survived for so long. So they excavated a Buddha statue there. So spices travel across the world, have been traveling for thousands of years, and along with that, ideas, currency, people have traveled. So the spice trade has actually been a very, very important part of global development of civilization. So with that, I want to just stop and let's do a quiz just to get started. So we'll do it as a survey question on Zoom. What is the difference between a spice and a herb, right? So this is my quiz to you, and I have four choices. Number A, spice is feminine while herb is masculine. Spice is of British or American origin while herb is American in origin. The third choice is spice comes from roots, flowers, fruits, seeds, and bark, but a herb is only from leaves. A spice is always ground from parts of a plant while a herb is dried. So those are A, B, C, and D. So let's do a survey question and let's see what you guys what you guys think. So you can answer the poll question. Let's see what, so click on the answer. Let's give everybody a couple of minutes to answer. I'm just looking at the panel. All right, I think that's good. It's not changing much. So the answer, as most of you have guessed, that 75% of all attendees have guessed, is C. A spice comes from the roots, flowers, fruits, seeds, and bark of a plant, but a herb is only from the leaves, right? So that's the difference there between a spice and a herb. So cilantro is a herb, and ground pepper, as you'll see, or turmeric is a root or the seed of a tree. So that's how it works. All right, with that, let me just move on to the role of spices in India. So India has always had spices. So if you look at where spices grown, here's a map of where spices are found. Different spices are grown or found in India. So turmeric, black pepper, nutmeg, cinnamon, green cardamom, cloves, cumins, coriander. All of these you can find them all over India. And even in North India, you find the more Mediterranean type of spices like saffron, for example. And if you look at Indian cuisine, these are the typical spices that you would use there. You would use turmeric, you use red chili or green chili, you use cinnamon, use nutmeg, pepper, saffron, cardamom, and so on. So you can see that Indian cuisine actually uses spices quite heavily, and no dish is complete without spices. And India actually is home to many spices. It's the original home of many spices, where many spices were discovered, but also has imported spices. So Indian cuisine has never met a spice it did not like. And over centuries, all spices that have come to India have become adopted and have become indigenized to a great extent. So when I come to green and red chilies, you'll see that there. The other thing is that India is also home to its own holistic system of medicine, which is Ayurveda, which is several thousands of years old. And as part of Ayurveda, spices are used as key ingredients in holistic health. They're meant to keep a person healthy and avoid diseases and cure disorders. So it's part of a holistic approach. So Ayurveda includes spices. And so that's one of the reasons why Indian cuisine always has spices in it. And on the right is a map of the hotness of Indian curries. So if you look at all the different types of curries that are out there, depending on what you are eating, you can have some very mild spiciness, and you can have extra hot, right? So you have, anybody who's had real Vindaloo knows that it's super hot, right? So or Madras curry or Chettinad curry, if you go to any of the Indian restaurants, you can order the hottest and it's going to really burn you, right? So that's how it works. That Indian cuisine actually uses spices everywhere. The level of spices, the kind of spices varies. So there's a lot you can explore with spicy Indian food there. So I'm going to now go through a few spices and talk about what they are, where they come from, and how they're used in Indian food. So I'm going to start with the biggest one, which is turmeric. So turmeric is very commonly used. You find it in every kitchen. When we are growing up, our moms especially use turmeric for everything, from clearing up your skin to if you got a cut while playing, they would put turmeric on it, for example. So turmeric has been around, is a very key part of Indian food and Indian kitchens for a very long time. And turmeric has very ancient origins. It's been known for 5,000 years. So if you look at some of the ancient Indian texts, you'll find turmeric being mentioned there. And turmeric actually comes from rhizomes of two plants. It's called Curcuma domestica and Curcuma aromatica. They're member of the ginger family or the Zingiberaceae family. And so in many Indian homes which have the room, they grow turmeric, and then that turmeric plant, at some point, you pull it out, and then you take the rhizomes, and then you dry it, and then you cut it and powder it, and use it in various foods. So it's a food ingredient which adds color. So just a little pinch will make anything you put in yellow. It has mild flavoring, but it also, most importantly, acts as a preservative. And preservation is very important in a hot country. Before refrigeration, if you wanted to ensure that your food lasted for a day or two, you needed to put in some turmeric. Otherwise, it would spoil, right? Because of bacterial growth. So turmeric is actually important because of its antibiotic properties, basically. And in turmeric, the active ingredient are these chemicals which are called curcuminoids, which are the key ingredients and that are responsible for its action. So turmeric is foundational to Ayurveda because any Ayurvedic treatment that you get always uses turmeric as its base. And it's an antibiotic, as I mentioned. It is a disinfectant and skin cleaner. So it's good for your skin. And it's supposed to be good for disorders of the skin, upper respiratory tract, joints, and digestive system. And many of us from India who got married, the ceremony that you see on the right, we all went through it, where you dress in your yellowest clothes, and then the women in your family will come in and they will basically put turmeric all over you. So you basically make a paste out of turmeric and you put it all over your food and all over your hand and feet and face. So you can see that in the age of social media, it's become like a social media thing, and you'll see all these pictures all over social media from Indian weddings, right? So that's how it works. So it's typically used in many religious ceremonies. If you go to an Indian temple, you'll find turmeric being used in various ceremonies. And then for marriage ceremonies, for important ceremonies, it's always included. So turmeric is considered a really a foundational spice to Indian cooking and Indian life. The other plant that's important in Indian cooking is black pepper. And black pepper is native to South India. So the southern India has the right climate to grow black pepper. And the plant from which it comes is called Piper nigrum. Or the black pepper plant. It's a woody vine. So you create a framework, a lattice of some kind, and then you plant this vine and let it climb up. And then it grows. And over several years, it will put out these seeds that you see in the middle. And these seeds are then taken and you basically dry them to get pepper, the black pepper. And this plant grows natively on the Western Ghats on the Malabar coast of India. That's the southernmost part of India. And the climate there is ideal for pepper because it requires hot and wet climate. And India is not the only place which has a climate. So in fact, most of the black pepper that you see in supermarkets actually comes from Vietnam, and which has a very similar climate to South India. So you'll see that Vietnam is a major player in black pepper. And black pepper has been known for 4,000 years in Indian cooking. And in fact, the term pepper itself comes from the Sanskrit pipali, from which you get Latin for piper. So I mentioned the trade with the Romans and the Greeks. And so the Romans, when they came to India, they actually picked up this word, and then it became Latin for piper, and from which you get pepper. So pepper, the term itself comes from South India, actually. It has South Indian origins. And in Ayurveda, pepper and turmeric are combined to make many treatments. So it's a very popular, well-known spice in Indian cooking. Before red chilies, which I'm going to come to in a little bit, pepper was used as the main ingredient to give hotness to Indian food. Okay, so it was used for many years. And then if you look at varieties of pepper, we get black pepper, which is the hottest pepper that you can find, but you also get more milder and more flavorful types of pepper. So you have pink, you have green, you have white. So you have many different varieties of peppers, which are much less hotter and much more flavorful, while the black one is the most pungent, right? So that's what we are used to. But if you want to have something that is a little bit different, you can look at all of these different varieties of pepper, right? So, and nowadays you can order them online, for example. So there are many different varieties of black pepper. And black pepper has been a major driver of global trade. That's why the Romans came to South India to trade. Then the other spice that's very common in India, though it's not of Indian origin, is saffron. So saffron actually comes from a flower of the flowers of the Crocus sativa plant, or autumn crocus. That's part of the iris family of plants. And interestingly, this does not originate in India. It's actually originates in the Mediterranean basin. And it's one of the oldest spices known to man. Actually, it has been used for about 10,000 years. So the ancient civilizations that grew in the Middle East, and then they spread and then into India, these ancient civilizations, they knew of saffron, and they used to trade saffron. And the knowledge of saffron has been around in the Middle East and Asia for a very long time. In fact, today the major source of saffron that you see at the supermarket is actually Iran. Iran produces the majority of the world's saffron. In India, we have saffron that's grown in the northern climates, northern parts of India, which have a similar Mediterranean type of climate. And so you get apparently the most exotic, the best saffron actually comes from India. So that's why I've highlighted here. Now, interestingly, saffron is also the most expensive spice in the world. It's because the flowers actually have to be harvested within a day. So you have all these fields of saffron, and then when a field actually starts putting out these flowers, you have to grab them within a day. And before they wilt, and then you have to grab these stalks of the flowers. So you can see these stalks, and then these stalks have to be picked immediately, and then they become, and then you have to dry them, and that gives you saffron. And why is it expensive? Because in order to produce a kilo of saffron, you need to pick 150,000 flowers, which means several people working 40 hours. So it's basically one work week from several people who are harvesting the flowers and then picking these stamens and then drying them. That gives rise to 1 kilo of saffron. 1 kilo of saffron. So it's $5,000 per kilo. right? It's not quite at the level of being as expensive as gold, but it's not that far either, actually. And interestingly, saffron, as I said, it has Mediterranean or Middle Eastern origins. So saffron comes from the Persian zarparan, which means gold strung, which means that these stamens are considered golden color, and also because of the effect it has on the food. So typically, you don't put it into your food just directly. You basically soak it in water, and then once you take the water, once it has soaked, and then you mix it, and then you put it into your food, and it imparts a golden color. And the golden color actually comes from a chemical called alpha-crocin. But in addition, there is a strong flavor. You don't want to put too much saffron in your food because that flavor will basically overpower everything. There's a chemical in there called saffronal, which actually is the key ingredient in saffron that gives it taste. So if you go to any Middle Eastern restaurant or Indian restaurant, you'll find dishes which have got saffron in them, but you typically put only a little bit of it. You don't put too much, and typically you dissolve the saffron, or you mix it in water or milk, warm milk, and then you pour it into your food. Okay, so that's really how it works. So saffron is actually one of the important spices in Indian cuisine. Then I'm going to go to nutmeg. So nutmeg, like saffron, does not originate from India. It actually originates from the Indonesia, what is now Indonesia, specifically the Spice Islands, so the Moluccan island chains. So the Moluccas are at the extreme end of the spice trading routes, and they are, in fact, sitting between Asia and Australia. And they have very exotic trees that grow there because they are at the boundary between two continents. And there's a tree there called Myristica fragrans, and this nutmeg comes from the seed of that tree. So you pick the seeds, and then you break open the seeds, and then you basically grate them or grind them into powder, and then that gives rise to nutmeg. So the locals there have been using nutmeg for a long time. They, on the order of 3,500 years. Nutmeg made its way to South India in 7th century AD through trade, because India had an active trade across the oceans with Eastern Asia, and that active trade, led to the export of food, ideas, and so on. And the nutmeg tree made its way back to India, where it's been grown ever since. And in fact, quite a bit of the world's production of nutmeg actually comes from India. One of the sad parts of the history of nutmeg is that it was the subject of a war between the Dutch East India Company and the islanders who lived in this Moluccas island chain. So there are roughly 15,000, 20,000 people who used to live there. The Dutch came and conquered them, and there was the ethnic cleansing, and there were only about 1,000 people left because the Dutch wanted to actually get hold of those islands to grow nutmeg there. So it's one of the very sad parts of the story of spices, that it led to colonization and also some violence. Then coming to the spice itself, nutmeg has been used in cooking for thousands of years, as I mentioned. And one of the things that people like about it is that it has a warm, pungent, nutty, and slightly sweet taste. So it has that perfect balance of being sweet, nutty, pungent, and so it gives a very unique flavor to any food that you make, especially baked food. So anything that is baked, if you add a little bit of nutmeg, you actually kick it up a notch. So it's a favorite for sweet and savory foods especially. And in Indian cuisine, it's actually a key part of Garam Masala. I'll come to Garam Masala in a little bit, and it's used to add flavor to Indian cuisine as part of Garam Masala. Now, one of the interesting things about nutmeg is that the tree, Myristica fragrans, it's a 2-for-1. That when you break open the seeds, the covers are not discarded. The covers are themselves spice. They're called mace. So if any of you know where mace comes from, it comes from the same tree as nutmeg. And the seed is actually grated or ground to give you nutmeg. But then the cover is actually used as a foundation it gives you another spice, which is mace. And one of the interesting properties of nutmeg and mace is that they contain a natural insecticide. Chemists have basically said that that's myristicin. There's a chemical called myristicin that's responsible for it. So nutmeg is actually an important part of Indian cuisine, not of Indian origin, but we've actually embraced it wholeheartedly. Okay, so then the next spice I want to talk about is cinnamon. So cinnamon actually, is again not of Indian origin. It's actually comes from many of the countries around India. So, for example, Sri Lanka is a source of cinnamon, and actually cinnamon has been used, has been grown in Sri Lanka and then traded to Europe for many thousands of years, on the order of 5,000 years, and it comes from the bark of the cinnamon tree. So there's actually several species of cinnamon trees. The original one is called Cinnamomum verum, or the true cinnamon tree that grows in Sri Lanka. But the cinnamon that you find in the supermarket actually doesn't come from there. In the United States, most of the what you call cinnamon actually comes from other species of the cinnamon tree, which are called the cassia, and they are grown in Vietnam, in China, and other countries. Now, one of the interesting things is that when I was researching cinnamon, I found out that people lied about the origins of the cinnamon tree to hide its origins, and to hide where it came from, where they got it from. So between Europe and India, you have the Arabian Peninsula, and the people who lived in the Arabian Peninsula knew a good thing when they saw it, and they knew that people wanted cinnamon. So they made up a story about the Kinemonon ornion, which they fed to the Greeks and the Romans, or the cinnamon tree. And the story is like this: there are these giant birds that live on these tall trees somewhere, and sometimes guarded by dragons. And these birds go somewhere and they pick up these twigs and they bring them to form their nest. And some brave guy actually goes up with a stone, and then he basically slings stones at those birds until they fly away, and then grabs the twigs that are in the tree, and then that is cinnamon, right? So that's the story. And ironically, the Greeks and the Romans, for all their devotion to reason, they bought it actually. They had doubts, but they bought it. But they used this story to keep it as a trade secret for thousands of years, and also to justify a premium price. So, for example, in the Roman Empire, a pound or a kilo of cinnamon was worth somebody's monthly salary. For example, 1 month of your earnings is basically would buy you a pound of cinnamon or a kilo of cinnamon. So that's one of the interesting things that I found, that people have lied to keep the origins a secret of cinnamon. Now, if you look at the two varieties of cinnamon that are out there, the Ceylon or Sri Lankan variety, which is this one that you see on the left, is actually considered the softer, more complex, more delicate one. And that's the one that you use very frequently in Indian cooking. And it's considered very mild. And if you look at these rolls, right, they're actually, the bark is very thin. So when you strip the bark off the tree, you dry it and you make it rolls of it. That's called the quills. And this bark is very thin and much more easy to break off and powder and so on. So you could put it into a coffee grinder and you could make a powder out of it. But the other variety, which is what you normally find in supermarkets, which comes from the cassia tree, which is also a cinnamon tree, it's harder and thicker, and it has simple quills. But unlike the Ceylon version, it has a very strong flavor. So if you look at the strong flavors that you see in cinnamon rolls and cinnamon pudding and other things that you find out there, it's because that comes from cassia. If you use the Ceylon cinnamon, it's going to, won't see such a strong taste. So that's one of the interesting things. So if you look at the chai or Indian tea, sometimes they put cinnamon in it, and it's typically the Ceylon variety, which is available in India. So it's one of those interesting things that you find, that the cinnamon, there's this big story about the cinnamon bird that they used to obscure its origins, and cinnamon comes from two or three different types of trees, and then they give you different flavoring and different qualities. So yeah, so that's cinnamon. Then I'm going to come to the big one, which is green and red chilies. So when you talk about hotness of food, you're referring to chilies. And ironically, chilies come from America, right? So they're native to South and Central America. And this picture that you see on the left, this is a tiny berry. This is called Capsicum annuum plant. This is the ancestor of all modern chilies. Everything that you see in Mexican cuisine, Indian cuisine, it all comes from this little plant over there. And this plant was used by the Incas and the Aztecs Aztecs and also native tribes, even in what is now the southern United States, for food and medicinal purposes. And as the New World became known to the Europeans and to Asians, there was a trade, and in terms of fauna and flora and spices, and that trade is called the Columbian Exchange, because there are new varieties of food that were available, like corn, like tomatoes and green and red chilies, which could be traded from here to Asia in return for black pepper and other things that would come from Asia. So this is part of this trade. And when these varieties made it to Asia, they were really embraced, because Asians love spicy stuff, and they're like, hey, let's take this spice and do something with it, right? So now in India, red chilies have been embraced, and there are many varieties of red chilies. So you can see there that in North India you get what's called this Kashmiri chili, which is extremely hot, and then in South India you get this chili called Baidagi chili that is actually fairly mild, and then you have one of the hottest peppers in the world, which is called the ghost pepper, or Bhoot Jolokia. So and then where I come from South India, we swear by this Guntur chili. So you can see that in India, the chili that came from the Americas has basically morphed into many different varieties, and it's been adopted as a cash crop in India and also a part of Indian cooking. And in fact, at this moment, India is the largest exporter of chilies and chili products, actually, in the global market. So you can see that in the Americas, chilies have also evolved. So you see all the different chilies that you're all familiar with, jalapeno, poblano, chipotle, and so on. But in Asia, we have lots of different varieties of chili, and India has the largest variety of chilies that you can see there. Now, chilies bring the heat, as you very well know, and the key ingredient in there is capsaicin, which is also now, if any of you have, a muscle rub or arthritic ointment, capsaicin is the main ingredient there. And capsaicin brings the heat there. And the unit of hotness is the Scoville units, which you may or may not be familiar with. So at the very bottom is your regular bell pepper that you can buy, green and yellow bell pepper. And then up comes your poblano, jalapeno, Hungarian, serrano, and so on. And then at the top, if you look at this, you have the ghost pepper, right? So the ghost pepper is Indian. And then Carolina Reaper is the hottest pepper in the world. That's the hottest, that's very high in hotness. And interestingly, I found out that capsaicin, pure powdered capsaicin, is the very hottest substance in the world, right? So you can actually chemically extract capsaicin, and then you can make a powder, and that would be the very hottest thing that you can find in the world. So why did these plants develop this chemical? So the interesting thing is that biologists say that it is mostly in the seeds. So if you take any of these peppers, the seeds have the most of capsaicin. The cover has some capsaicin, but it's the seeds that are really the killer. And the whole thing, reason why it evolved that way is that the plants wanted mammals to eat them, but not eat the seeds. So if they would bite the seeds, they would get really a jolt. So mammals would not be able to eat them, and then the capsaicin, the seeds would pass through. And especially the plants were targeting birds. So birds eat these peppers, and then the seeds pass through them. Birds have no receptors for capsaicin, so the hotness doesn't affect them. The seeds pass through, and then new peppers grow from there. So as I said, the chilies bring the hotness, and the hottest pepper in the world is the Carolina Reaper, which comes from the United States, and the ghost pepper from India is not far behind. So that's green chilies for you, and red chilies for you. So now I'm going to go to my next question in terms of quiz. So let's see what you think. So the question is, who brought chilies to the Indian subcontinent as part of the Columbian Exchange? A, the British during the rule of India. B, Americans fighting in World War II from India. C, the Portuguese who colonized parts of Western India. And D, the Dutch East India Company in their search for profits. So let's set the poll and let's see what you think. Okay, any more who want to, let's give a minute for anybody else who wants to answer the quiz. Okay, all right, I think nobody else is answering, so I'll reveal the answer. Um, so the answer is the Portuguese who colonized parts of the west coast of India, and they brought chilies to India. And not only did they bring chilies, they also brought the potatoes. Potatoes are native to South America, so they were brought to India by the Portuguese and introduced to India. In fact, many of the dishes that you see in Western India, they include chilies and potatoes along with other proteins. So yeah, so that's great. And I think looking at the results, it looks like C, which is the Portuguese, and D, the Dutch, are neck and neck in terms of the answers. Okay, that's great. That's great. So now let's talk about garam masala. So what is garam masala? Garam masala literally means hot spice mixture, right? So you have a set of spices that are roasted and ground, and then you make a powder out of it. And that powder has the tastes that come from each of these spices. So this includes nutmeg, includes mace, black cardamom, cumin, cinnamon, cloves, bay leaves, green cardamom, and black pepper, typically. And these spices give a variety of taste. So there's hot, there's cool, there's tangy taste. And once you make the powder, you store it, and then you can use it in curries. You can use it as marinades for whatever food you desire. And interestingly, it has no single standard recipe. So if you go to the store, you find many, many different varieties. So if you go to any of the Indian stores around the Boston area, you'll find many, many different brands and different varieties of garam masala. And you can also make your own. It's not that difficult. All you need is a coffee grinder. And if you go to any of your stores around here, you'll find most of the ingredients at those stores. And you can also add your own. So you can add some fennel, for example, that's commonly added. You can add a little bit of salt, some dried chilies, and then you can make it as hot as you like. So garam masala is a very foundational ingredient in Indian food. And actually, I think I would encourage you to make your own at some point. So then let's go to a quiz, actually. So we're done with spices. We're done with garam masala. So let's go to spices. And here's your last quiz for today, which is which ancient spice used in Indian cuisine was most recently introduced into Starbucks lattes? So A, spicy chai, B, garam masala, C, bhoot jolokia special, or D, turmeric. So let's start the survey and let's see what you guys think. All right. Okay, really interesting. So A, spicy chai is, oh, wait, people are still answering. Take a shot at it, guys. This is just a fun quiz. Okay, so A, 21% of all participants thought that spicy chai. B, garam masala, 11%. Bhoot jolokia, 2 people, 11%. And D, turmeric, which is 58%. So 11 out of the 19 participants who voted. So let's see the answer. So you're right. So the majority is right. So turmeric was introduced as an ingredient of lattes. So Starbucks actually has been selling turmeric lattes since 2017. So you can go to your nearest Starbucks and buy one, actually. So that's one of the interesting things. And actually, in the United States, turmeric has been having a moment. It's been used in many, many different places. Most stores now carry turmeric. Actually, that's one of the interesting things that I find. So many of us who've been in the United States for a long time know that you had to go to an Indian store to buy turmeric, but that's not true anymore. McCormick sells turmeric, actually. So it's really interesting to see it become more and more important. All right, so with that, I think we are at the end of this presentation. I just want to highlight a few links I've put in the presentation that eventually should be shared with you. And if you're interested in spices and Indian cooking and Indian cuisine in general, you can try these things out. You can make your own garam masala. So there are 3 recipes, links to 3 different recipes that I have put in there. They all have different levels of detail, different amount of work that's required, but generally it's not that hard. So if you can find the ingredients, you can grind them in a coffee grinder or your favorite grinder and make your own garam masala, anything that can powder everything together. And once you have that, I would encourage you to try out these easy recipes. They're not that hard. You can easily make them. Anybody can actually make any of these recipes. You don't need to go to your Indian restaurant to make them. So grilled tandoori chicken, my favorite. Slow cooker butter chicken, which we've been making during the winter. Actually, we have a slow cooker now, and it comes out awesome. Actually, you should try it out there. Then aloo gobi, that's potatoes and cauliflower. That's one of the bread and butter Indian foods, and chana masala, which is chickpea curry. So these are all very easy to make. Anybody can make them. You can follow the recipe. You can either use garam masala that you buy from a store or make your own and then try it out. So it's fairly easy, and I hope you get to actually experience making your own spices and your own spice mix, and then trying it out on some of these dishes. So with that, I think I'm just going to stop for today, and I can take questions.
There aren't any questions right now, except I do have one. Does harvesting the cinnamon kill the tree?
No, they actually peel it off. They peel off the outer bark, and then they dry it. They don't take the bark for the whole tree. If you look at pictures of cinnamon plantations, what you find is that you can see that here. So on an annual basis, they actually strip the bark off the bottom part of the tree, and then it grows back over the subsequent seasons. Okay, so they don't harvest everything. They wait until the time is right.
So we have one comment and a question. The comment comes from Sheila, and she's surprised that potatoes came to India from Portugal and not India.
Not Ireland.
Oh yeah, not Ireland, sorry.
Yeah, so interesting, the Portuguese were just a way station, I should say. The Portuguese had a colony on the west coast of India that's called Goa. Some of you may have heard of it. It has a very unique culture because of the mixture of Indian and Portuguese elements. And the Portuguese have been in India, were India for 500, 600 years. So they learned about potatoes from and actually the Portuguese and the Spanish actually, because the Incas in South America actually used potatoes for food. So the original source is South America, the Andes Mountains, basically. And from there, the Spanish and the Portuguese brought it to Europe. And then from Europe, it was introduced to India by the Portuguese.
Interesting. Celia has a question. Why do you have to blend the spices together in a coffee grinder? Are they so coarse?
Because some of them are not that coarse, but some of them are hard. Like the black pepper is hard, and even the cinnamon is a little bit hard. So you don't have to use a coffee grinder if you have a mortar and pestle. So back in the days when we were growing up, if you made this garam masala at home, you would basically use a mortar and pestle, and you would basically grind it with your hands. You can do that also if you have that.
So there aren't any more questions. I'm just asking one more time to the audience. If anyone has any more questions, put them in the Q&A. So someone asked your favorite Boston Indian restaurants.
Boy. So interestingly, Boston is having a lot of new Indian restaurants. There's so many of them that are coming up that I cannot keep track of them. But my favorite is Treasury Treasury Indian restaurant in Burlington. It's a very nice restaurant. So nowadays Indian cooking, because India has now opened up to the world. There's a lot of experimentation going on. A lot of the world's top chefs are Indian. So Treasury is the closest that comes to a global Indian cuisine that's really cutting edge in terms of the food. And I really like Treasury. It has a very nice patio. So in the summer, I'm planning a trip there. That's my favorite restaurant. There are others around Boston. There are lots of very good Indian restaurants around Boston. I think Maharaja in Cambridge is actually very good. There's an Indian restaurant in Howard Square that's actually excellent. I think Boston is very lucky to have some really good food. But the best Indian restaurants in the United States are in New York City. So you find some Michelin-starred restaurants in New York City, which are Indian restaurants. One place that comes to mind is Junoon, which is a Michelin star actually.
Excellent. Thank you for your recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn wants to know what makes a vindaloo so spicy.
So vindaloo actually is a Portuguese dish, it's a kind of developed between Portugal and India, right? Because of the very long history. So it has a strong element of red chilies. So that's these chilies, right? So these red chilies. So it's a very strong element of red chilies combined with vinegar. Right, so vinegar and red chilies and you basically pack it in there, and that gives the taste. And the original dish I think was made with pork, right? But in India there's not much of pork consumption, so now it's other stuff. You throw in other stuff. So vindaloo is actually, I think it's the vinegar in combination with the red chilies that makes it very hot.
Well, thank you. Those are all the questions, but everyone in the chat is saying how much they enjoyed it, and thank you so very much.
Sure, you're welcome. And it was my pleasure, and hope you like it. Eventually, we'll share the presentation, and I hope everybody here gets to try out some of these dishes and more. There's many more that are available out there.
Okay. Thank you so much to the India Association of Greater Boston for making this Discover India series possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.